Hello and welcome to the ICT Pulse podcast. I'm Michelle Marius, your host and the editor and publisher of ICT Pulse, the online platform where we discuss ICT issues from a Caribbean perspective. Joining me today is Cleveland Thomas, the International Telecommunications Union, ITU area representative for the Caribbean, and we'll be discussing the ITU and its work in the region. Cleveland, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle, for having me here, and also to the listeners of ICT Pulse. It's a pleasure to be here.
So Cleveland, let's just jump in. From the name, the International Telecommunications Union, we can appreciate that it's a global organization that focuses on telecommunications. But perhaps you can give us a clearer picture of what the ITU is about and how countries benefit from its work.
Right. So one of the things we are quite happy to say, first of all, is that the ITU, the International Telecommunications Union, it's a specialized agency for ICTs. We deal with loads of ICT-related matters on a global scale or global perspective, and anything dealing with technology, the ITU is engaged with. So things like spectrum and satellite and networking and technologies and policies and regulations. How do we interconnect or talk with another country in another part of the world? There is some way along the line that the ITU is involved. The very fact that you have country codes of 1246 or 1868 or whatever it might be, ITU clearly would have had a part to play in there. And I also wish to know that we are the oldest UN agency in the world, celebrating over 151 years of our operation. And the agency is there really to use technology to help improve the basic lives of all persons throughout the earth. In a nutshell, it's really using technology to improve lives.
I would think, though, that the ITU, like a number of international organizations, they have developed some sort of strategic plan for the things that they want to do and to accomplish. So what are some of the ITU's current priorities globally? And how does that translate into the work that happens in the Caribbean?
First, let's remind ourselves that when we talk about the ITU and the extent to which we are engaged, we substantially work with the public as well as the private sector. And I think the order of the day for us is collaboration or partnership. We have over 190 plus countries that are in our membership, and over 800 or so private sector entities, including members of the academic institutions that form part of the ITU. So that when we talk or work with or collaborate with institutions, it's really at a global scale with key players in the industry. What it is that we might be focusing on, or what is our attention substantially, is again using the technology to improve lives. And how can the technology improve lives? There's a level of connectiveness. It is through the technology that you are able now to talk with me a few thousand miles away.
Yes.
It's through the technology that we are able to do our business transaction. We are able to treat with medical issues. It's through technology we talk about safety for on the road or even education or otherwise. So that to the extent that we can use the technology to improve in any of those areas, we find ourselves fully engaged. And for us within the region, there are some things that are of importance to us that gain some level of priority. I would just name a couple, and this is not an exhaustive list, but just a few. One of the things that we have found within the region is the issue of climate change and emergency communication. So to the extent that the technology can help save lives or help to improve in things like early warning systems and otherwise, the ITU will do its part. Last year's Maria hurricane and others, it's a case in point where we recognize the impact of the weather changes, and small countries like those in the Caribbean are very vulnerable. So what can we do to help? Another area of importance for the region has been that dealing with crime and security. And it has moved from crime of probably breaking into somebody's car or their household or causing harm and so forth to the persons, to the point now where we are talking about cybercrime. And cybercrime meaning using the technology to commit crime. So inappropriate material or people taking your material and using it in some unauthorized way. Again, the ITU works with its partners to put measures in place, laws in place, standards in place, help administrations with policies and regulations and so forth to again build some kind of confidence in the use of the technology. And we believe that the whole issue of the connectiveness within the Caribbean, not every country within the Caribbean by themselves can afford to utilize or gain the full benefit of the technology because they don't have the resources to do it. The natural economies of scale and so forth doesn't facilitate that. So again, the technology causing harmonization of approaches with the region, whether it has to do with regional protection, data protection, or freedom of information, or getting the persons to draw closer to their governments. We can help and have been working with a number of administrations in those areas. So I would say the issue of emergency communication, I would say issue of security, and also using the technology for just the having a connected region, areas of reference that have been gaining some attention for us through the ITU and our partners, and with the likes of the universities or the regulatory agencies or governments also.
So, Cleveland, you talk about the ITU and its partners, and I don't think that, at least one of the reasons why I was keen to speak with you is because as much as the ITU has a presence in the region, a lot of people may not necessarily know about the organization. And although, yes, it might be working on projects or being part of projects, it may not necessarily be seen to take the lead in the projects. So how does the ITU actually implement its work?
That's a good question. I mean, the extent to which we are made known to the public or there's some kind of awareness of who we are. But again, we need to step back a bit. Our role, our key clientele within the region is the government. So really the front face of doing things, it's the government. They are the elected officials of the people and to deliver to the people. We are just partnering with the governments who are our members. We are ITU, the secretariat, to provide support to the government, who are our members, to help them deliver on many of their promises to the people. So it is not uncommon for people or the average Joe on the block to say, well, who is the ITU? I don't know who they are. Why? Because again, we work with the government, but surely Joe on the block should be able to say, well, my government is either making sure that I pay low rates for my phone calls, or he should be able to say, well, my government is providing education free online or something with the technology. And we probably could have a hand or may have a hand one way or another in the background. So we don't necessarily take the lead, and that's not our remit. How do we carry our projects? And how do we facilitate that? Through the needs of the government. One government, based on their local circumstance, may identify that security, national security, is more important to them than perhaps liberalizing their telecommunication environment. And if both of them approached us, we sit and discuss how we can lend support to that focus. And clearly, the focus on crime measures and protection or cybersecurity is going to be very different from perhaps developing some kind of app or helping with the resources or training for people with healthcare or education. So we work with them for their projects also, but it is true that you don't see us in the front page like that with the average person on the street.
Yes, that's definitely the case. Can you share with us probably some of the major projects that the ITU has supported over the years in the region? Because I do think that at least, hopefully one should be able to point to the fact that, the ITU may have been instrumental or supported, was a big supporter in some important projects.
I think one of the biggest areas for many people, I mean, now for the younger ones, they may not even remember it, but there was a time when the telecommunication sector was monopolized. So throughout the region, there was a single telecommunication provider. And it was the call, I suspect, of the benefits of liberalizing your markets. And governments of the region took a decision to liberalize. So people had choices. Now, rather than cable and wireless, you talk about Digicel, or you talk about Flow, you talk about some other local name or entity that is providing services. We within the ITU would have found ourselves, again, governments coming to us and ask, how can you help us to liberalize our market? And we would have sat with them, defining best international practices, the steps that are needed to do that, what do you put in place, and even having legislation, which is a critical component. Now, Joe on the block may not see that as important, but if you do not have the right infrastructure, legislative or otherwise, or policies, then you can have a lot of confusion in the market and you would not gain the confidence of investors coming in. So the ITU would have played that part. The ITU would have developed under a project we have, for instance, called HIPCA, harmonizing the policies and regulations and so forth for the Caribbean region, where the entire Caribbean got the benefit of exposure to things like, okay, when the competitors come in, they need to speak to each other. So things of interconnection and interconnection policies and framework. We develop blueprints and framework, things dealing with privacy. Again, the idea of exchanging costing. How do you cost the services? Again, the ITU get involved in that. And many of the other areas, whether it has to do with data protection or legislation or even infrastructure. Other projects we get involved in is having the computers in community centers. The ITU would sponsor and make that available to governments, particularly for rural areas. So we made computers available, particularly for use, as I said, in rural areas, but also for those who cannot afford. The issue of connectivity again, leaving no one behind. There are billions of people who still have not had the benefit of connection. So we provide that to governments. We go out, we have been involved in an issue of cyberbullying. There's a lot of that going on within the region. Many schools, inappropriate material being exchanged, some people private data that are being exchanged. Again, we work with the governments to put things in place, advising schools in the region, bringing in consultants, psychiatrists and psychologists and others who help us to develop framework for that. Simple things also like Internet of Things. How do you how can you improve the efficiency of delivery of services online? And loads of people are still quite unhappy with the kind of services, the traditional services that they have to go through. We have worked with and continue to work with government. Again, you would not hear ITU branding that to the public because the public is not our main clientele, it's the government.
Absolutely. And one of the things, I guess, based on what you had said before, that at least I want to just highlight is the fact that government needs to approach the ITU to get certain things done. I mean, maybe yes, you as the ITU rep may draw to the to a government's attention that there might be a project or some initiative that one might be prepared to support, but one is really driven by what the government say that they want, as opposed to the ITU probably trying to
Right,
dictate that they
right.
should be doing this.
That is absolutely correct. There are a couple of things too that we need to be mindful of. Well, there are a couple avenues that the government can take in order to get ITU's engagement or involvement. Certainly, they can come directly to the ITU and make their requests, and many governments do that, regardless of the ministry, saying that, hey, this is an area for which there's a gap, and can you help us? Just before you came online, I was on the phone with another administration now talking about some particular help they need in a few areas and planning for 2019 already. And how far can we go and what will it cost and how do we put these things in place? So that's one way. There is also the way whereby, or the approach where we ourselves recognize that there is this particular direction that the industry is going. And because sometimes as small nations with limited resources, the governments and their agencies are not aware of it. So we bring it to their attention and say, hey, listen, there is this that we would like to do. Do you have an interest? And if it is not a priority for them, then it will not happen. If it is, then some of them come on board and they work with us, and that happens as well. But we should not ignore that even if a government comes to us and asks for assistance directly or indirectly, that there are also some other conditionalities, because to us, the issue of, or the government, they not having the necessary resources is another challenge for them. I would caution that the ITU does not have an infinite amount of funds to just simply provide assistance to all countries, all its stakeholders. And it's the same with other governments. So with the limited resources that governments have had and the challenges of a downturn in the economy worldwide or otherwise, some governments have really had to make a decision on what is important to them now and what is not as important or what will not go forward. And sometimes ICT is not an urgent item on their list because of their limited resources. So yes, I am just saying too that we can help. How far we help, even if a request is made, is really dependent on a few factors of resources, timing, and so forth to provide that for the region.
Okay. All right. So let's just change tact a little bit.
Aha.
So since you've been the ITU Caribbean rep, but tell us a bit more about yourself.
All right. So I am the Caribbean Area Office Representative for the ITU for the past 7 years. Prior to that, I was Trinidad and Tobago's Chief Executive Officer for one of the state enterprises that they had dealing with ICT for national development. I was responsible for creating and bringing into fruition through the government the state enterprise known as iGovTT, where I was CEO for that agency for probably over 2.5 years or so. Prior to that, I was also Trinidad and Tobago's National Chief Information Officer, working within the ministry for public administration and information in Trinidad and Tobago, where I serve under minister there for probably about 3 or 4 years. And again, sometime before that, I was working with the telephone company, TSTT, as a junior executive for more than 13 years. I am a certified accountant by profession and also holding my master's in ICT policies and regulation. I have some good experience in my auditing because I lived in London for close to 9 or 10 years and did the academic side over there. That's where I found my wife, former Miss Universe, most beautiful woman in the world. If somebody cannot say their wife is Miss Universe, then something is wrong with them. But I would say my wife is from Africa, Zambia to be exact. We have 4 beautiful children, 3 boys and a girl, ages between 24 and 17. It would be remiss if I don't say most people, when I'm in the region, they will know me and introduce me as preacher. Why? Because I also minister the gospel. I have, prior to taking up this post here at the ITU, I had a radio program on prayer in the morning in Trinidad on Radio Isaac. And I can tell you it was the #1 program for more than 10 years, with almost quarter of the population tuning in. I was involved in and still involved very deeply with church and ministering and reminding people of the gospel.
Okay.
And I should say also, I have a really, I'm blessed extended family. My background is one where we were quite, the more appropriate word to use is humble. But the Joe's word on the block is we were poor. Very, very poor. But we have had a family that was really united, and 9 siblings, and we were vendors and we worked very closely together.
But it's also interesting just in terms of how, your life has evolved from what might be considered lowly beginnings through with your education. You lived and worked in the UK. You went back and worked with government with private sector and eventually with government. And now, you are a, representative for a global organization.
Yes. And I say that and say it all the time. God and God alone. It's no way that I can in any way imagine a young man selling at a roadside and known as the nuts boy and being in the central market area where people bring their fruits and vegetables and everything else, and I'm pushing their cart to carry it from one point to another, or take these buyers, these customers to their car and getting tips and so forth, doing all of that for a long time and selling and studying by the roadside with my teachers coming and help me to now be seated here and representing the region in this really good agency and writing and speaking and having meetings with offices of prime ministers and presidents. It's no way. This is not normal. It's not common. It has to be God.
Definitely a blessed life.
Amen.
So
it sounds like we could have church.
We'll leave that for another occasion. But just talking about being the ITU area rep for the Caribbean. So what do you do?
What do I do? My remit really is to again our partners. Our remit is to meet their needs, to work with them to help fulfill their mission, their vision, using technology as a means to develop that. So what do? I meet with our partners, whether government, private sector, academia, whoever. I meet with them. I hear from them. where they are going and perhaps share what I think they can do, or they tell me what they want. And I am to help make it happen one way or another. And if I can make it happen through the ITU or getting somebody else to make it happen, that's what we seek to do, to assist and make the region really get the full benefit of ICT in homes, have a connected world.
Okay. So, since you've been the ITU Caribbean rep for about 7 years, how has telecommunications and ICT evolved in the region? What has been your observations and experience?
There are some good and there's some bad things that have happened or and are still happening. The good side is that the pervasiveness of the technology is far ahead of us. It's everywhere. I mean, it's not a matter of a country saying, well, I don't want to, I'm not interested. Even in the most closed economy, they recognize the power of technology. So it's not I don't think countries have an option. And I think there is more focus of the benefit of the technology. It has been used as a significant tool for even elections. And we know of the reports of the alleged interference of some nation in other countries, election and so forth, and the impact it may or may not be able to swing votes one way or another. So it has that level of importance, and the region recognizes that, and we are seeing that the world now, it's not a matter of being surrounded by water, because water is not enough to isolate you. People are traveling. Our region depends on tourism. When these tourists come in here, they are used to a particular speed. They are used to a particular type of service. So I am seeing that we are talking and doing the thing, cryptocurrency. We are talking about robotics. We are talking about digitalization of things and so forth. And even though we may be a few steps behind, we are not as behind as some other countries or region, So in the region, I think we are moving in the right direction. There is a recognition of the importance of the technology to connect all people. And I mean, why not? So that has been positive. It has been good. Where there are gaps still, in most developed countries using the technology and the importance of it, we see that these countries allocate funds towards research and development. They recognize and they support young innovators. We recognize that the contribution of GDP through ICT is like 25%. So it's the industry where, even though there might be a collapse worldwide, it's one sector that continues to thrive well and do exceedingly well. You don't hear of failure or possible failure of Facebook or Twitter or any of those. You're hearing of the value and so, but in the region, even though there are these opportunities, the region's investment in ICT as part of their GDP is less than 3%. Again, I repeat, less than an average of 3%. Well, in the world, it's like 25% or more.
Yes, yes.
So there's a lot of room for that. And I think the challenge I also see is that, we are quite good in having plans and passing probably regulation and laws, but not as good in the implementation. Very, very slow in implementation. The system of operation and the structure of operation is quite slow. So the ease of doing business continues to be a challenge in the region. And I believe that the threat of security regionally is starting to have an unwelcome level in the region, which is threatening the extent to which we can see the kind of progress we'd like to have. So the good and bad, there are some good things, there are some bad things. I would like to see more happen. really like to see a lot more happen. I would really like to see a lot more implementation other than the words. If we could do as well as we talk, I think we would be ahead of the world.
Absolutely. So, since we're talking about implementation and the countries probably doing more, I wanted to just quickly touch on the fact that the ITU tends to have several meetings going on almost daily, whether it's based on working groups, etc. But they also have some major global meetings. So, like you had the World Summit on the Information Society, WSIS, which is held, I believe, every May, and you
Yeah,
have the plenipotentiary conference that's held every 4 years, and one actually has one coming up this coming October, November. But
right.
what has been the Caribbean's participation in some of these activities? Are you aware?
Well, you know, quite bluntly, it's not as good as it was in the past. And I say that because I actually came to know the ITU through some decision that the United States had taken unilaterally some 20 or so years ago. And it had to do with benchmark rates and accounting rates if it's 15 or 20 years. But
Yes.
and at that time, when the decision was going to impact the countries within the region in such a significant way, and at the time, the governments were dependent on telecoms revenue to subsidize or help with the cost of healthcare or education. So it was a major source of earning foreign reserve. And here come the United States saying, hey, listen, they are paying too much for calls and so forth, and that need to reduce. And they took it to this benchmark of 15 cents from a dollar, and in some cases $2 for some countries. So country said, what? No, not at all. And the participation of the region said, listen, we need to fight that. And the place to fight that needed was a world stage. And the world stage to facilitate that discussion and to give our case was through an agency called the ITU. And that's how I come to know the ITU. That was the agency that would hear and put a world policy on this decision that was taken that was going to affect us financially so badly. And as Trinidad and Tobago's rep at the time, I worked with the government and got involved. So our participation there was, almost every country within the Caribbean region was there participating. That was some 15 plus years, as I say, ago. Today, major events like WSIS or GSR or the Plenipotentiary Conference or so, you probably will get 20% participation. You probably get 4 countries or 5 countries who will attend regularly. And mind you, I must admit that it can be very costly to attend these meetings because
Yes.
it's outside of the region. It's not a 1-day meeting or a 2-day meeting. It's quite expensive, but you know what? Many of our countries within the region do have consulate or embassies in Geneva and other parts of the world. And if those are briefed well, they can still participate and represent the region. But it doesn't always happen, unfortunately. So, as I said before, it's 20 or 25% participation in the region. And I have heard governments say that, hey, listen, do I attend these meetings or do I pay for my public servant's bill? That's not a question.
Yeah.
To do that.
Yeah.
So, in answering your question in summary, there has been a significant drop of Caribbeans' participation at these events that we hold. I am hoping that here it is, we're going to be electing officials for the next 4 years. We're going to be deciding what is the priority for the world as far as technology is concerned, that the region would find a way to make their voices known. I'm hoping, therefore, that we would have far more participation, and even if they cannot attend, that they send their proxy votes through some other agency within or some other government in in the region. I'm
Okay.
really hoping for a bit more, but unfortunately, the slide has been significant in terms of attendance in many areas. And Michelle, just put that aside. Even holding a meeting right within the Caribbean, if I'm to hold a regional meeting, the participation is still very low. To fly to get somebody between, let us say, if they will come from St. Lucia to a meeting here in Barbados, or from Jamaica to Trinidad or something, again, you will get 4 or 5 countries being represented, because the region is at a place where they are strapped significantly for cash, and there are so many things going on apart from technology.
Absolutely, that's definitely true. And yeah, as you rightfully said about just the reality of whether or not to pay for your country to be represented at this far meeting in a far-flung location, or to be able to pay another bill. So whether it's not to pay your public servants, or
Yeah.
keep the lights on in a ministry or something.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's understandable. The fact is that decisions will be taken whether you are there or not.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the time, these decisions can affect you. But if you are there to help shape the final resolution or decision, that I think is important, and you don't want to have to live with the ultimate decision after some time, when in fact you would have been able to make your representation. I recall when I represented Trinidad, we always put forth a statement, a common statement that would say, and special provision be made for small island states or developing states for this particular recommendation, or due consideration, or whatever, or they give you some more time so that it doesn't impact you in the same way as others who maybe be able to withstand some of the changes. So that's the thing, you are not there, decisions would be made. You are there, or even share or give somebody else the opportunity, the mandate to represent you. That's important. I think that is an avenue that has not been sufficiently been explored by administration to get their voices be, or align themselves with a decision of some other similar situated entity.
Okay. And as you had mentioned about with votes, I guess voting for various positions and offices, as well as planning priorities and strategies, that those are the things that will be the table at the planet pot that is coming up in October.
Right.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so we're getting down to the tail end, and I just wanted us to just touch on, and you may have mentioned it in one of the earlier questions, but probably just to frame it a little bit more clearly. Are there some projects that are coming on stream in the region that the ITU is supporting that you can just share with us, that at least maybe if we hear about them in the future, we'll say, oh well, this we know the ITU has been supporting.
Yes, of course. There are quite a few. When you hear projects for girls and women in ICT, ITU is really, really pushing a lot of that aspect to get women to move into the sector. And those people who might be interested in jobs in that area, again, we are really encouraging agencies to put and make special provisions to get the women in that area. We are not seeing the same level of probably studies or so in the area related to the ICT sector. So that's something that happens annually, Girls in ICT Day. We also have the Link project. It's a project speaking to emergency communication, or even the app. We are trying to find a way in which, using social media, to inform people, or they inform their agencies of situations either pre a storm, a hurricane or something, or during the storm or hurricane, where they can upload certain information that can help avert a disaster or a loss of a life and so on. We are in the process of doing some of those. Another project that is important to us is this whole thing about innovation, youth innovation. We are trying as much as possible to get from having an idea and having a product to getting it marketed. And there's a term we use called conformance and interoperability. How can we get your product to be tested that it can be exported and be sold within the region or outside of the region? We are starting to put things in place for some of that to happen. We are working too with many of the governments. In Jamaica, we have the data commissioner. How do you treat with people's private information, and how do you protect people's data and so forth? Those are things that are important to build confidence in the use of the technology. And of course, dealing with the issue of cybercrime or security. We have working with governments directly on that. Governments are setting up their network infrastructure and having those. And when you start to hear items dealing with spectrum, can I use this spectrum for this particular class of service or not? And should we follow a particular order? I'm using words that probably the average person on the street can relate to. You turn your radio from one band to another. It's a different spectrum band they're using. Can that be used only for radio, for phones, or can it be a mixture for anything else? These are things we work with organization. Those would be some of the important ones to take note of.
Okay. And my final question, are there any specific goals that you'd like to accomplish during your tenure as the ITU Caribbean area representative?
Well, yes. Personally, my goal is to really be operating, and let it be said that I operated like Daniel. I represented God and God alone above all things. That's a personal thing for me. In terms of my work, if we can have a situation where the Caribbean really have stronger use of their youth resources, if the Caribbean can make great use and benefit of the youths in this area, that would be a marvelous thing. One of the things I certainly would want by the time I leave here, if God permits it, is that we have, and this is the measure, ICT as a contribution to GDP at least moves away from 2 to 3% to like 10% over the next 10 years. That in itself will be a measure of how well we are utilizing the technology in every respect. And that's a actual figure measurement that would be useful. So personally, as I said, God represented through my work, walking as much integrity with wisdom. And two, I think is the extent to which we as a region can be measured by the level of our contribution to the national growth in the region. That would be good. That would be good. That would be great.
Definitely. So Clevelanders, thanks again for coming on, and I'm thrilled that we have had a chance to talk about the ITU. I mean, yes, I've heard about the ITU, and certainly have even done some work for the ITU over the years. But it's good to help to bring some awareness of what the organization does, since it's such an important facility of like global standard making for telecommunications and ICT, as well as just in terms of helping the world in the direction in which ICT and telecommunication has been and continues to develop.
And one final thing for me too is that what I find very useful here is that I have some really good support. My boss is in Brazil, Bruno Ramos, and then our bosses in Geneva, the director of the BDT, because I fall below the development sector. There are three sectors. We have the radio, the standardization, and the development sector. But my bosses in Geneva are very, very supportive, and my colleagues have been really, really supportive. So I think the relationship with that makes it work. And when we have people like you and your team, Michelle, reaching out to us, and that of the governments, I cannot think of one government in the region where we don't have an extremely good working relationship. I can't think of one. It has been a really blessed opportunity for us here, and an excellent working relationship with the governments as much as it is with my seniors.
Okay. Thank you so much again, Cleveland.
Thank you.
That's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening to the ICT Pulse podcast. You can find links to some of the things we talked about on our website, ict-pulse.com. If you like this episode, please show your support by leaving us a review on iTunes, as it will help others find the show. You can email us at info@ict-pulse.com or drop us a note on our Facebook page, facebook.com/ICTPulse, or via Twitter @ICTPulse. We hope you'll join us again for our next episode. Take care.